Firstly, thank you very much for that lovely warm introduction. And today's session, just so everybody knows, is actually going to be recorded and we're going to be releasing live on the CFO 4.0 podcast. But what we want to talk about today is all about understanding what businesses should be asking from their finance team. What are some of the transitions that we're talking about in the finance community that actually you and individuals across a business should be aware of and should be talking about? So as I've said, my name is Hannah Munro. I'm a host of the CFO 4.0 podcast, but my day job is actually head of transformation at ITAS, and we're a Sage Technology solution provider. And with me today on the panel, we've got a cracking panel today, I have to say. We've got Alistair Brisbourne, head of technology research at the ACCA, who's going to be sharing some of the insights that they've got from their research. Got Laura Duncan, who's Senior Finance Manager at Octopus Energy Group. So they've actually got over 5 million customers globally and is actually one of the largest UK energy suppliers in the 8 short years since it's been founded. And actually it was quite interesting, wasn't it? We were saying how many of us are already customers. So that was quite an interesting conversation before the podcast. We've got Amina Begum, who is the Senior Finance Business Partner at the Lego Group. And I'm pretty sure that all of us have had some kind of experience with Lego over the years, but their play experiences are sold in more than 120 countries, and they have more than 20,000 colleagues worldwide. So thank you very much to our panel for joining us. So I think we should start, Alistair, with a conversation about what is the research telling us about what businesses should be asking from finance over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you. It's great to be here. It's a really good question. It's a difficult question, obviously, because different organizations will be in slightly different sort of contexts in different areas. And it also highlights the fact that there are some two sides to the fence here. There's how should an organization be thinking about its finance team in order to sort of get more out of it, as well as how is the finance team actually going to take up the mantle of that greater level of responsibility and ownership of different tasks. And it sort of seems like old news at this stage, but we're still very much on a sort of post-COVID trajectory. Those years definitely, as we're all very aware, introduced an accelerated pace of change in a lot of areas. But very few of those processes have fully completed, and certainly the elements of that are just as relevant today as they were then. And different organizations will find that different elements are more important to them than others. And I think there's a few different things that are within that, as our members are saying, as our research is constantly showing. The big prize is, of course, to get to the point where finance is sort of refocused beyond just the traditional sort of finance roles into more sort of looking at human capital, natural capital, the triple bottom line stuff for people, planet, profit. So moving into a space where they're responsible for reporting on these other areas as well. But in order to get there, of course, there are some basic steps, and that requires sort of good investment in having an enterprise-wide data model, the capabilities, the technology that underlies that. So cloud is just as relevant, obviously, as we found out earlier this year. We heard there was a significant pullback or stalling of investments in cloud, so it's still very relevant that organizations continue to invest in this area. The other side is engaging more with advanced analytics and predictive analytics to undertake better decision-making, more holistic view of the organization. Now, that then also enables the ability to collaborate more across different business units. Perhaps even before there, though, or perhaps at the same time, there's also the need for finance teams to think about how can they increase productivity and efficiencies just to free up their time to take on some of those responsibilities, because as we'll find out, and as I mentioned, the other side of the fence is, right, how do you actually get to this point? And so what should organizations be thinking about? Sort of summarize it, or is they should be thinking about their finance team as the sort of purveyor of insights, as the ones who are able to extract value from the organization or the data within the organization.
And I think, we talk a lot about data, and I think every business sits and looks at the amount of data that they have and goes, wow, it's great, we've got all of this information, but actually harnessing that's a different story, isn't it? So Laura, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on data strategy and what we should be thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. There's so much data out there now to be ready to be harnessed, and there's such a big opportunity there for every organization. I think the two most important things for me that you need to be the result of a data strategy is to have data that is sufficiently accurate and that you can get to quickly enough so that you can actually deliver the insights quickly to senior management, decision makers, whoever needs it within the organization. The first one, the accuracy, I think you have to, the challenge there is to make sure that you have single sources of truth as much as you can. That's really difficult, maybe even impossible, especially in a growing company like Octopus. That's a challenge which we have to deal with all the time. And then from the timeliness, so then with the source of truth, you're going to find that a lot easier to do if you have all of your data in one place. So for example, we have moved towards having all of ours in a data lake and having consistent structures across that. So, that's a challenge and no one's perfect, but that's where we're moving towards. And then having all the information in a data lake means that actually you can put the different sources of data together that you need to create insights very quickly together, and they're at your fingertips. So they're the two things which I think are, for me, in my working life, they're most important and what I can see delivering value to the CFO and other senior managers. To get there, I think there's two things you need on that bigger picture then, is you need to have a bigger picture of where your data strategy needs to go. Two of my colleagues at Octopus in particular have always been very focused through our growth from over the 8 years about making sure that we have the platform and the technology available to us that we need to house the data and house the technology that we need. And they're always thinking ahead of what do we need in the future. So I think that's very important. And overarching all of it, I think it's that the senior managers, C-suite, need to give value to this. Give value. They need to appreciate how much value you can get out of data and give staff the time to be able to invest in that. And it's always hard, isn't it? That balance between short term, we need this result now, and then the long term of, okay, well, let's not do that and let's look towards the future.
And I really like the fact that actually you at Octopus have been thinking about this for years, right? So I think there's always an assumption when we think about data that it's something that happens in big companies, and big organizations. But actually, I think, and certainly from the conversations I have, is that smaller companies should also be thinking about this. It isn't something that you think about when you get big. You need to build. It sounds like you've been thinking about it from the beginning.
Yeah, you have to start right from the beginning. Our first data scientist was one of the first people employed. And now he heads up a big team of data scientists and data platform engineers. But that was
thinking
employee
ahead.
12 or so, something like that, 12, 15. So you have to think ahead. But also, I think you make a good point as well with the size of company, is that I'm fortunate to work at Octopus and we have amazing tools at our disposal. But previously I worked at a much smaller company and data was still useful there. So we had a much smaller database. The company had turnover of 12 million, but it's still important there to inform decisions.
And I also think there's an interesting conversation about, you talked about having data in one place, but also having the same definition of data. Because actually that's what, finance business partners spend a lot of time doing, isn't it? Translating data to the wider business. So, what's your thoughts on data, and what do you ask of your data team at the Lego Group?
So for me, I think data needs to be able to tell the story that you're trying to narrate to the wider business. It shouldn't just be a set of numbers, because let's be honest, numbers alone don't tell you anything. And I think if I can't figure out the story that aligns with what the business is saying, then for me, that data in itself is not good data. So it's not just about having timely data. It's about whether you can match that back to the narrative that you're trying to get out there. Is it painting that picture for the wider business that we're trying to get across? Because if it isn't, what are we missing? What do we need to do? So I think, yes, I agree with all the points that you've mentioned, that it needs to be good data, it needs to be timely data, but at the same time, it needs to be something that you can align back to the narrative you're trying to paint. If you can't do that, then it's why, what are we missing? What do we need to do in terms of our data strategy to give us that, so that we can go out and, in layman's terms, we can explain to the business what it is we're doing, so we can not only tell them, but show them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting insight. So, Alistair, what about the skills that the future finance team is going to be need? Because obviously, businesses need to invest in this skill set. What are some of the things that that the ACCA is thinking about in terms of skills around data?
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion, and it's sort of, I digress a little bit, but I had a discussion with a friend a few weeks ago who trained as an accountant many decades ago. And in one of his early roles, he was sat in front of a gray box, what was called a PC, and he was asked to learn Fortran to come up with a time management application for his team. So to me, that sounds like a much more daunting task than learning a bit of coding for data analysis skills, especially since we have a lot more aids available to us now. And so to go back to the point, the skills, yes, there is a sort of evolution of those data skills that is required. But as Amina's pointed out, as you pointed out as well in your role, those are already very well developed within the qualification. Right? Data is what finance professionals do. It's their bread and butter. Now, there is a bit of extension of understanding about different types of models that can be used, different types of advanced analytics, different types of technology that aids that. But it's not a revolution in what we're doing. It is just there are bits and pieces that will be relevant to different roles, different functions that will need to be gradually sort of brought in. This may not be a popular statement to make given the context, but we also need to remember that data science is a maturing discipline itself. There's a comment from the guys at Revolut the other day saying they want their data scientists to focus less on coding and more on modeling, which is exactly what finance professionals, learn how to do. It's that sort of that side of things, and so if we know that there are these skills that we can pick up on, and we can develop, and we can further evolve, that should be the end goal, really.
And I think we talk obviously about data skills, and you mentioned obviously that Octopus took on a data scientist in the early days. Now, there is a conversation about whether that actually sits in finance or not. So what's your thoughts on that, Laura? Because obviously you guys are living and breathing this every day.
I think that's so interesting, because there are all sorts of places within an organization that data professionals might sit. But I think it should sit within finance, and you said exactly what rang true with me, Alistair, which is data is what finance professionals do. So finance professionals are already the ones dealing with a lot of quantitative information, understand the numbers, but more crucially, they understand the numbers such as those to do with cash flow and profit margin, and those are some of the really important drivers within a business. They're the sort of engine, one of the engines that makes a business go, okay, so especially for Octopus, there's things like good customer service, which is so important. But from a business point of view, you also need to have that engine of finance understanding driving things. So for me, it sits very naturally next to that, to have data also sat within the same function and then linking in, because then you can pull in the same information. For example, our team focuses on the gross margin part of our energy supply financial statements, and we're pulling in different insights from different parts of the business and then feeding back, for example, liaising with our operations team and being able to say, well, there's some revenue here which we don't appear to have been billing to customers. Let's go and make sure that those customers are billed effectively, so that the customers have a better customer experience, equally with all the impacts that has on our cash flow and not needing to write off revenue and all of those kind of things. So by joining those two things together, I think it is very powerful.
Because it's not just about the data skills, is it? It's about understanding the context particularly within finance. And Amina, I'm guessing you spend a fair bit of time trying to educate the wider business on those finance skills and understanding the finance data that you're pulling out. So what's your thoughts? Should data skills sit within finance, or should they sit elsewhere?
Both. Oh, controversial, I know. So the reason why I say both is because we in finance have historically and still do handle tons of data, but we also look at it from a different lens to the business. And what I found is that when you try and marry the two worlds together, that's when you actually are able to tell the story you're trying to tell. So if they sit in finance, then that's when the business partnering kicks in, right? It's about making sure you can still go out and have those conversations with the business. And it's not just transactional. So you know what's going on. You can pair that together. So essentially you take the role of that business analyst as well as the finance analyst to combine the two. So it's doable. But to be able to do it from a finance team, you need to be able to have those dialogues and build those relationships that aren't just happening at month end or at times of budget, that aren't just transactional. Understand what's going on in that business and be able to pull that data together. So it's not just quantitative, but you're using the qualitative data to be able to piece together what it is we're trying to do, support with those insights, right? Drive those changes in the business. So yeah.
So I think probably what we should do is actually explain what finance business partnering, because obviously we live and breathe and we hear the word finance business partner a lot in a financial context in the finance community. But for those perhaps that haven't come across that, what is a finance business partner and what does it do for a business?
So a finance business partner, from my perspective, is someone who not only is within that finance team doing those transactions, but goes out to the business, fully understands what it is you're doing, what their stakeholders are doing, and you're able to not only support, but also challenge them. So you're in those dialogues, you have a seat at that table, your opinions matter, and what you do is it's a collaboration. So rather than the business coming to finance when they need something or they need to know a number or try and understand something, or finance coming to you at a certain point in time, it's more about that continuous collaboration, that continuous discussion. What's going on? What's your opinion on it? Can we come together? Can we tell that story together? Because that then is so powerful in driving those changes and educating not only finance people, but the wider business.
So I had a really interesting conversation with a CFO, and he actually said, if I get presented with a business case and my team haven't been involved, then it's too late. So actually what they prize is getting involved at that early stage and helping build the business case and supporting the decision cycle and the strategy around that. So I think that's a really interesting insight. And Alistair, is there anything in the research, is finance business partnering coming, do you see that growing within finance and within businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real growth area, and it has been, again, sort of going back to the pandemic, where there was a real focus on sort of what are the core activities, how can we squeeze more out of our data and more insight, and then how can we collaborate more across the organization with other business units. Without a doubt, and just reflecting on what Amima said as well, and the point about skills earlier that we were discussing, there's a huge element of relationship building that's required within that. And that is sort of a new competency or skill set that isn't maybe, or certainly maybe from the outside, finance isn't perceived to be the most sort of outgoing sort of group of people. And so that is another challenge, being able to build those relationships across the organizations and demonstrate what is possible.
And I think the concept of building those storytelling skills, like let's be honest, like in finance, storytelling is not necessarily something that we naturally associate, but that's a real skill set for us to have when we're working with the wider business. So asking your finance team to build those skills to be able to communicate and educate the wider business on those finance level skills is so important. And Laura, what about you? Obviously, you guys have developed a huge amount of data skills, but are you developing those kind of that finance business partnering aspect of business?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a business finance business partnering team, but I think it's relevant for really everybody within the business or within the finance team to have those storytelling skills, like you say, because you can do the best analysis ever, but if you can't put a narrative around that and tell the story in the way that matters to the person you're trying to communicate to, then you might as well not have bothered.
Yeah, the business has to understand the context that finance is giving, because there's no good, finance sitting there and shouting from the rooftops, this is what I'm telling you. If the wider business doesn't understand it, that's finance's responsibility to pick that mantle up.
And the challenge also is then for the finance professionals, like Amina said, is for them to understand it and have the context of the business and those collaborations and the understanding, and not for people to work in silos, and ways to be reaching out and understanding what's going on around them.
And I think, Alistair, you talked a lot about businesses and finance needing to be agile and have that agility. So what do we mean by that? Because it is one of those terms, and we've had this discussion before as a group, that gets thrown out into the wider world. What do we actually mean by finance being agile?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there has been some sort of development of how we use the term agile. Obviously, it comes from the area of project management, so a movement away from the old waterfall approaches, which are sort of more static and sequential and a lot of sort of reporting, etc. And agile is supposed to be a little more sort of short term, sort of dealing with multiple things at a time. And then we've got the sort of wagile approach, the combination of the two, and sort of combination of waterfall and agile. And what this highlights is that essentially these approaches are sort of choose the one that is most appropriate to the project that you're undertaking. But so the way we use agile these days really is based around a few things. It's about having the objectives of the organization, sort of common objectives of the organization at the heart. It's about being more collaborative. It's about having sort of opportunities for short-term learning and feedback. So you sort of the old sort of fail fast sort of tech motto, and these things just allow us to sort of be a little bit more flexible and adaptable. And I think business partnering is a good example of the evolution of that agile approach.
So I think what we're saying here is what we want is finance to move forward at the pace that the business needs, potentially even faster, right? Because in finance needs to be at the front edge of the business, not sort of following behind. And we need the finance team to be more proactive and be able to change faster and to move faster. Amina, what does agility mean to you? How do you think about agility within your business?
So I work a lot with digital and product. So for me, agile is about having that flexible approach. And flexible doesn't necessarily mean you can change everything all the time, but it's not so tight on the solutions, right? So you give yourself opportunity. As long as you drive the outcome that you want, you've not necessarily fully paved your path there. So there's flexibility in terms of, if things change, if climate changes, circumstances change, you learn to adapt, and you learn to adapt fast. I think it's a little bit different when you look at the finance side of it, because with finance, traditionally, we have certain times where we need to deliver certain things. So although the business has that flexibility to be able to move faster, we can't necessarily move at that pace. What we can do is support them with what they need, but to do that, you need great data. But in terms of, I guess, finance and agility, it's about being open. Is there a different way I can do something? Can I drive more efficiencies in the area that actually free me up to business partner to be able to go support the wider business? And it's also about the business having that understanding that even though the entire business moves forward, finance still have to do certain deliverables at certain times. Therefore, they may be seen as not being so flexible, but that doesn't mean they're not agile. It means that they just do it in a different way, similar to how we transform in different ways.
Yeah, because there is this ask sometimes from finance, isn't it, that they're doing, business comes up with an idea, they decide to execute, but actually what they don't understand is that there's a certain amount of things that finance have to do that perhaps the wider business doesn't see, because all they see is the nice reports and the great insight that comes out of it. So it's balancing the two.
It's like take purchase of software, for example. It's great, right? So the business have decided they want to purchase something. We've got the contracts ready. Great. But in the background, finance need to figure out how they're going to capitalize that asset, how they're going to treat that asset. There's so much admin, if you may, behind it all to make sure you have that smooth process, right? To make sure the business get what they want when they want it, so that it doesn't hinder the transformation process. So I think the one thing is making sure that as a business, you loop your finance teams in beforehand. Because if you want them to go at that same pace to be as agile, They need you to take them on that journey so that they can support you from the background with all the things you can't see, so that you get to that endpoint when you want to get to that endpoint.
And I also think there's an interesting piece, isn't there, about, we talk about purchasing software, for instance, in terms of like, how does that work with the data strategy? And obviously finance leading on that data strategy, taking that forwards, there can often be silos of information that happen across a business. And is that something, Laura, that you've come across, like silos of data, and it's harder to connect at the end, isn't it?
I have come across that, but fortunately not at Octopus. You can, when you're developing a new product or a new idea or a new business area, then you can end up with silos. People are sort of doing something quickly, kind of in the corner, maybe on a little Google sheet making something happen, a little Python script making something happen. But my experience is that when that a good way to approach that is then when those areas grow, to then incorporate them into the bigger data strategy and just bring everything together. But there's a massive challenge there, which is the communication of between everybody. And actually that maybe speaks to, say, an agility, in the sense of having what you might call an agile hierarchy with a flatter hierarchy, which is my experience of agile. At Octopus is having a relatively flat hierarchy where you haven't got a lack of a hierarchy to a certain extent. Perhaps you haven't got those, because I think if you have an organizational structure with a lot of hierarchy, that's what often brings you into a place where you have silos. But if there's communication going on through the business, but even sometimes you can help the communication through the business by utilizing certain platforms. I mean, we use Slack, and it's just the best way to communicate. It's just brilliant. You can just, if you've got a project coming up, you can just pull people into that, and the relevant people from data, finance, operations, technology, they're all pulled in together, and then people know what's going on. And I mean, it's always a challenge.
And actually, I think what you said there about, someone going off doing a small project, but then feeding that back into the overarching strategy, that's actually what we mean by agility, isn't it? It's about the flexibility to go away and do something, but making sure that it comes back in and aligns with the wider strategy across the business. And Alistair, when you're having conversations, or the ACC's having conversations across with other finance people, what are some of the other themes that maybe are stopping or barriers to finance actually sort of starting to make this transition?
Yeah, so I suppose it depends. We kind of need to break it down into stages in some ways, and when we're looking at things like the adoption of technology, there tend to be some notable challenges. Starting off with things like the cost and proving the ROI of the investment, which is the ROI. Things like fears about employee resistance, how you're going to update skills so that people learn, how you're going to migrate your data across. But then once people get into the implementation of particular technologies, those challenges change a little bit. And so then we move from sort of adopting the technology to how do we maximize the technology. And then there are questions around things like, how do we integrate our suppliers into our new systems? How do we make sure that we don't risk siloing processes or weakening of controls? And these are things that tend to come up even in recent sort of Digital Horizons research, which is due to be published next week. We find that these are challenges that are facing a lot of organizations in terms of how do they extract the most out of their technology. So it depends on the stage.
And I think a lot of businesses will wholeheartedly stick their hands up and say they want better data, they want more insight, they want more, more support from finance in the business. But I guess technology is a big part of that, and we need to make sure that finance and the business is supporting finance to make that transition. Amina, what do you think are some of the things holding finance back from making that transition?
I think there's an element of comfort at times, because there's certain things we've always done a set way, we're taught to do it a set way. So it's that comfort of it works, and it works for you, and you get things done. But there's also an element of capacity. So at times finance are really, really busy. And when you're then trying to learn a new tool or trying to find something new and adapt something new, you need to also find the time not only to be able to learn it and truly understand what it's capable of, but sift the existing information and data and feed it in. And that takes time. that also takes individuals who would understand what they're looking at to be able to do that. And I think finally, it's having the permission to be curious and brave. So be curious, how do you drive efficiencies for yourself first? What can you do to speed things up for yourself that then will also benefit the area that you work in and ultimately the business? And then be brave enough to voice it. Everyone has an opinion and every opinion matters. And if you think something is cool, someone else will also think it's cool. So it's about you being able to fully understand it, to be able to then showcase that. But all of this comes back to capacity.
And I think that was actually a theme with yourself, Laura, wasn't it? Actually having the time to develop those data skills, etc. Tell us a bit about how you guys manage that.
Well, we have a big emphasis on learning and improving for individuals. So, for example, for my team, I'd always support them learning new skills. And for us, that means learning SQL and Python and improving our skills in that area. And yeah, just looking to the longer term goal, not always the shorter term goal. But I will say that I'm very heartened actually by the movement in the world of finance and data skills. I've been recruiting over the last couple of months to fill a role, and looking for somebody really with finance and data skills. And it's been heartening how many people have come through and said, oh yes, I'm really interested. Oh yes, I think that coding skills are important. I think that data is important. And that stands in contrast to the last time I recruited, which was 18 months ago, when I had far fewer people coming forward and saying those kind of things. So we think people who are qualifying are appreciating the importance here. They've got a curiosity, which I love you saying about the curiosity, because for me, that's the sort of fundamental. I mean, it's just fun. I love being able to have the data at my fingertips and then seeing what can come just from writing a few lines of code. And the technology is coming on the whole time, like things like no code options are out there, and then ChatGPT helping write code and troubleshoot. I mean, it's just incredible and just so exciting. So for me, that's the way we should be. That's one way that we can harness learning new skills.
So a business asking finance to learn these kind of data skills, this coding capability, is absolutely within the realms.
Absolutely so. I would say so. I think it's absolutely it's not for everybody. And I think that's really important as well. I think that if you kind of think of our traditional finance roles in one position on one hand, and maybe these new data scientists, still fairly new data scientists on the one hand, on the other hand, there's a spectrum between there. And we'll always have people who love the technical accounting and they want to stay in the accounting world and they'll specialize there and they have so much to offer there. But there is also somewhere to really be in the middle and be able to communicate with our data professionals. And I would say that actually the first place to start is with language. So say if your data is stored in databases, like what does a young finance professional know about what is a database? And just getting the language about a database is made of tables and it has fields and we're going to join this bit of data with the other bit of data. That's the place to start, because then you can talk to your data scientists, your data engineers, and also really understand your data that otherwise you're at risk of going, oh, thanks for the data. I'll just put that in my spreadsheet. And you can't audit it or assure it.
Yeah, and there's a huge amount of exciting tech to allow us just to have the opportunity to move into this. And Alistair, from the ACCA perspective, like how do we encourage finance to go down this route, to do more with technology, to take advantage of the ChatGPT, the AI, etc.? Is there an appetite out there for it?
Well, there's definitely an appetite. I'd just like to, by the way, say I couldn't agree more. There's an element of trust that's associated with our ability to communicate across teams, and that does require a basic level of sort of data literacy and maybe even AI literacy as we move forward. If communication is the linchpin of that trust, and having those skills is important. So yeah, I agree with what you say. In terms of the tech, obviously there's lots we could talk about, and we're at the CogX Festival. We could be here for another week. So I'll just limit it to the one of the moment, of course, AI, generative AI, which is incredibly important, incredibly beneficial to helping us achieve some of those goals that we've been discussing today, whether it's sort of thinking about automation in terms of productivity, in terms of small efficiencies, as well as the broader objectives of sort of how do we engage with this unstructured data and structured data in order to improve our reporting on non-financial areas. So AI is going to be absolutely critical. And then we have things like generative AI, which from a personal point of view are great for productivity, also great for learning new skills, great for supporting business analysts. Now, we just need to be very careful, of course, that these are being used in a way that is compliant with regulations, compliant with our responsibilities, and that we are using data ethically and understanding how the models work. But there are massive opportunities there. And I think at the ACCA, we're very positive about the role that finance professionals can play across the organization in making sure that AI models are being used sensibly, also being used for the right purposes, that we're using the right models for the right task, and making sure that data is being protected all along the way and used sensibly all along the way. So
let's flip the lens, right? We've talked a lot about finance and what it can do. Let's talk about, if we go back to the original purpose of this session, actually, what should businesses be expecting from finance and asking of finance? So, Amina, what's your thoughts? What should a business be thinking about now, and what should they see in 18 months perhaps they're not seeing at the moment?
Honestly, I think the ultimate thing is start looping your finance people in and build relationships that are meaningful, not transactional. Because I think naturally we can default to finance doing what they do, coming to you once a month maybe, giving you what you need when you need it. But the true beauty of it, the true power of it will be when the two merge together. And yes, I'm starting to see it even in our business, but there's so much more to be done. And it can't and it won't just come from the finance side, because historically, a lot of people are into the transactional level details. And you've got the business that aren't so much into that, right? They don't want numbers. They don't want spreadsheets. They, pictures are better. So merge the two worlds together, because once you merge that together, you form that partnership and you start being able to narrate that story to the wider business together, you'll start to see a shift in your finance teams. It will start being a true partner, right? They'll start being part of that, not just a little cog in the wheel. And that's when you'll see naturally that you start to think alike. You start looking for productivities and efficiencies, not in your own areas, but also impacting the wider business. And that's when you'll see that shift. Until those meaningful relationships form, it's very much going to be transactional.
So what the business should be asking for is from finance to come into the conversations that they're having on a day-to-day basis, to move away from just month-end based reporting and actually starting to support the business with data and be involved in those day-to-day conversations.
Well, give them a voice as well, because, there may be some people that do have an opinion, but they're afraid to share it because it's not their expertise, right? But actually, with everything that's going on in the world, everyone has something to offer. So if they're not expressing it, ask, allow them that space, and then they should allow you the same. So it's not just they're asking you, do you know what happened here? What's going on with this number? But it's about, tell me, what are your plans as a team? Where are we heading? Just build them into that goal so that it's a joint goal.
Awesome. And Laura, what's your thoughts? What should businesses be expecting from finance moving forwards?
I'm a little bit torn with this question, because on the one hand, I have a view of what I think the ideal would be for a finance team to be delivering, but equally there's the practical side of, is that actually possible? And you've got constraints of time, you've got constraints of what the accuracy of your data and the availability of your data. So I think there is a point of being understanding as a overall business of what data is available and what time is available and all of those things. But from an ideal point of view, I'd like to see finance being able to respond in a very flexible and quick manner to be able to support the business decisions which are going on and to have a seat at the table, like we've been saying. And maybe that takes a form of for example, having metrics that you're monitoring constantly, which are maybe on a dashboard that is available to anybody within the business to see what's going on, or anybody who needs to see it within the business, but then being able to respond to ad hoc requests that can drive a business forward in its growth.
So what we should be expecting from finance is obviously that data is served in a consumable format. So it's on demand versus being given at a point in time. We're saying that actually finance should have the capacity and the capability to deliver on those ad hoc information and insight requests. But actually what we're saying is you need to be cognizant of where you as a business are in your maturity.
Absolutely.
And you need to have that open and honest conversation with finance about, this is where we're at, this is the technology we can't have, how does the business support finance to get there? And actually this is what the output that finance can deliver. And Alistair, so wrap it up for us. What else haven't we talked about in terms of what businesses should be expecting from finance?
Well, in some ways I'm just synthesizing what's already been said. They're brilliant answers. Collaboration side is fundamental, flexibility is fundamental, understanding the data, but it really does come back to, I think finance teams should be challenging themselves to think about how can they extract more value from the data that they have available to them, and think about how it feeds into their organizational objectives. And if they do that, now I appreciate there's the day-to-day job, there's the serious issue of capacity, of resources, of constraints, and maybe that requires the organizations to invest a little bit more in their finance team as well, and think about how they can support their finance team in that regard. But finance teams should absolutely be challenging themselves to think about ways in which they can engage beyond the usual tasks.
And I think we need to be really clear that this is not just the realms of big corporates. These concepts, even though they might be wrapped up in smaller teams or even in individuals, when looking at this should be all the way down the scale in terms of what businesses should be expecting from finance. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I just want to say a massive thank you to our panelists. As I did know coming into this was going to be a really interesting conversation. And I want to thank you for your time, and thank you to our audience for coming out this early to come and join us.